Sex addictions cause real suffering. Reuters Edgard Garrido Sex addiction has gotten a lot of airtime in the past month after a number of famous men were exposed as serial predators and claimed the affliction as the cause of their disturbing behavior. Both Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey checked themselves into the same rehab clinic, with Weinstein saying he will go on a journey to conquer my demons. Addiction is not an excuse for criminal behavior. Indeed, it's quite possible that these powerful men don't have an addiction, though attempting to diagnose mental health conditions from afar is never acceptable. Rather than stating this irrefutable fact, many public figures and members of the media have taken a different angle, arguing that alleged UAL predators should be denied sympathy not because of their criminal acts, but because addiction doesn't exist. No. First, there is no cure to addictions. Second, there is no evidence that one can have an addiction to, despite this claim by experts. When you call an addiction, then you open the door to calling almost anything an addiction. See at Alan Frances MD on this topic. https://t.cock2mev701, Jeffrey Gutterman at Jeffrey Gutterman, November 7, 2017. Sex addiction is fake FAD diagnosis rejected by DSM. Mostly serves as lame excuse for abuses. Profit Center for Treatment Programs. https://t.corf49p7gn, Alan Francis at Alan Frances MD, November 7, 2017. Much of this denial is likely motivated by a well-meaning desire to see UAL predators brought to justice in a system that overwhelmingly fails women. But, in the face of plenty of evidence to the contrary, the argument reflects a troubling attitude towards mental health and its intersection with criminality. Perpetrators want to give the impression that they aren't bad, but mad. Naysayers, meanwhile, argue that perpetrators can't be mad, and so are therefore bad. The disturbing idea here is that mental health conditions cause criminal behavior. If you believe that, you believe there is a neat divide between those with malicious intent and those who suffer from mental disorders. The troubling implication is that a true mental health condition would make criminal behavior beyond the perpetrator's control, recasting abominable acts as symptoms of their struggles, and, essentially, rendering them innocent. This is simply false. There is no evidence that UAL harassment or UAL assault are related to the proposed features of UAL addiction, neuroscientist Nicole Prouse told Vice. Mental illness affects both criminals and saints. And except in extremely rare cases and for conditions such as schizophrenia, which causes hallucinations and delusions, mental disorders do not lead people to behave criminally. We shouldn't have simplistic views. You're either ill or not, criminal or not, says Steve Hyman, director of the Stanley Center for Psychiatric Research at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. The excuse that, "my brain made me do it," is much like the defense, "the devil made me do it," that was invoked by past generations, he adds. At most, says Hyman, your brain makes it hard for you to resist, but it doesn't make you do it. Denying the existence of addiction won't hurt the likes of Weinstein and Spacey. But it will hurt others, the men and, yes, women, who have never assaulted anyone but who suffer considerable distress from an addictive relationship to UAL desire, and who now must face the worry that if they talk about their problems they will be recast as a criminal. There is considerable debate in the medical community about whether addiction is a distinct condition. The conversation is complex, and deserves space to be explored through clinical findings and psychiatric thought. When depicted as a reflection of criminal behavior, discussions of addiction will inevitably be reductive. Many of those quick to deny addiction point to the fact that it's not included in the fifth and latest edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders DSM-5. This, though, entirely misunderstands how mental health conditions are treated and categorized. If one reads the disclaimers in the introductory material provided by the American Psychiatry Association, the DSM does not pretend to capture nature as it is, says Hyman. The DSM is not a magic mirror. It is not a Bible. It is simply a classification, which is a schema humans create and place on data to make it useful. It has some strengths and many weaknesses. The DSM uses checklist criteria to diagnose mental illness, a system that follows the model of diagnosing infectious diseases and is far from perfect. Many mental health conditions, like many physical conditions, affect people along a spectrum. Only this week, the guidelines on what level of high blood pressure counts as hypertension was formally changed, a reflection of just how difficult it is to draw a neat line between healthy and unhealthy. Manuals like the DSM can help clinicians understand and treat mental health disorders, but they should not be used to definitively state whether someone is suffering or not, or whether a particular cause of psychological distress exists or does not. There's currently no formal diagnostic term for hyperreal behavior, though there are clear medical guidelines on how to treat such symptoms. The latest edition of the International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Problems (ICD) does have codes for excessive UAL drive and other specific UAL dysfunction. U.S. healthcare practitioners are legally mandated to follow ICD diagnostic codes, which are developed alongside the World Health Organization. They are not mandated to follow DSM guidelines. And the next edition of ICD, due to be published next year, is considering including compulsive UAL behavior disorder as a distinct condition, with a draft definition published. Mark Potenza, psychiatry professor at Yale School of Medicine, says that there's a clinical need to treat excessive UAL behaviors. People seek help for different forms of problems with UAL behaviors. Some of those are engaging in UAL behaviors excessively or compulsively, he says. The debate within the field of psychiatry focuses on whether such UAL behaviors should be considered an addiction, an impulse control disorder, or another type of disorder. A similar discussion is happening around gambling, which was called pathological gambling in the DSM-4 and then gambling disorder in the DSM-5. Based on the existing data, pathological gambling, now gambling disorder, was reclassified, moving from classification as an impulse control disorder to being classified together with substance use disorder as an addictive disorder, says Potenza. The proposal currently under consideration for the next edition of the ICD would classify compulsive UAL behavior as an impulse control disorder rather than a behavioral addiction. There's certainly evidence that points to differences between addiction and drug addiction, though there are also findings that brain activity in addiction and, as a subset of that category, addiction, mirrors that of drug addiction. Currently, these studies are at an early stage, says Potenza. There's considerable uncertainty over how to diagnose and treat addiction, as well as other behavioral addictions such as gaming, shopping, and exercise. Such debates are hardly new to psychiatry. It wasn't that long ago that there was disagreement over whether depression was a real mental health condition. In fact, there's a long history of denying the existence of mental health conditions, and of falsely depicting those with mental disorders as criminals. That troubling perception of mental health is fading, but it lingers on denying that people can really suffer from compulsive UAL behavior as only the latest manifestation. Those who commit crimes such as UAL assault must be punished. And those who struggle with addictions must be listened to and helped. Only when we're able to do both will we have a truly enlightened approach to mental health.